Now let's define password complexity and user logout. So to do that, use the breadcrumbs and navigate back to My Realm, and then click on Providers. Then under Providers, we have a password validation provider. So in most cases, the default provider, which is the system password validator, is sufficient. Now, if you have an extremely complex password policy, you can write your own password validator using the WebLogic API. Our needs aren't so complex, so go ahead and click on the system password validator, and then click on the provider specific subtab, and take a look at the settings that you can specify for the default password validator. You can reject passwords if they contain the username. So if we had checked this box, it may invalidate our WebLogic 123 account. Probably wouldn't reject it, but we certainly couldn't create a new user with that same password. We can define a minimum password length and maximum password length. And then other types of character policies if you want uppercase, lowercase, numerics, or symbols. So let's define that we need a minimum number of numeric characters. So I'm going to say we need at least one number. And once we're done, click Save. And then no restarts are necessary. And so you should get the confirmation that it was updated. So now when we create a password for a user, if we don't have a number in the password, it will reject that password. So let's test that out. So go back to the users and groups using the breadcrumbs. Click on SQL user, and then on the passwords tab, specify a new password. Just leave off the 123, just specify WebLogic. And this should fail a few tests here. So click Save. So note that that WebLogic is complaining about the number of characters or special characters cannot be less than 1. So go ahead and enter the default password, WebLogic123, and click Save. Okay, so now we're going to configure user logout. So use the breadcrumbs and navigate back to users and groups, and click on the configuration tab, and then click on user logout. So you can see here that user logout is enabled. So the threshold for user logout is 5 consecutive invalid login attempts. After the 5th invalid login attempt, WebLogic will lock that account. And so we can see here that the lockout duration is 30 minutes, that account will be locked out, and then the reset duration is 5 minutes. So this is the number of minutes within each consecutive invalid login attempt that will cause the account to be locked out. So if you go beyond 5 minutes between invalid login attempts, the clock resets. The threshold resets down to 1. So let's go ahead and test this. Let's set the lockout threshold to 2 and click Save. This is going to require a restart. So let's go ahead and restart the admin server. Switch back to the terminal window here. Kill the server. Let's start it up. All right, once the admin server is back online, go ahead and log back into the console. Actually, don't log into the console. Log in using your SQL user account. But enter an invalid password. Try it again. Now switch back to the terminal window and take a look at the server output. Notice the last 2 statements. User SQL user in security realm, my realm, has had 2 invalid login attempts, locking the account for 30 minutes. So we can no longer use that account now. We have to wait 30 minutes. Okay. So let's switch back to the admin console and log in using WebLogic. And make sure you type that WebLogic password in correctly. I wouldn't want you guys to lock yourselves out and have to wait 30 minutes. I should probably change the lab to specify this to be 5 minutes or something. Anyway, change the threshold back to 5. Click Save. And don't worry about restarting it. We'll do that at some point. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create an auditing provider. If you recall, an auditing provider will log security events within WebLogic. So go ahead and click on the Providers tab in the Security realm, and then locate the Auditing tab. So under Auditing, there's no pre-configured auditing provider. To do that, go ahead and click New, and let's give our provider a name. I'm just going to call this Auditor. And there's only one option under Type. Go ahead and click OK. And now go ahead and click on the name of the auditor and check out the Provider Specific tab. And the Provider Specific tab identifies all the configuration settings for a security for an auditing provider. So you can see we can specify the number of minutes to rotate a log file. This is pretty high. And the severity level. So the severity level is very similar to application logging, where you define logging levels, such as info, debug, warning, critical, error, so on and so forth. So we can define at which level to log auditing events for WebLogic. So we're only interested in failed authentication attempts. Go ahead and click the select box and select failure. You can also set this to custom and then pick and choose custom settings of which auditing events you want to see. Do you want to see information, warning, error, success, or failure? So I'm going to select failure here from the list rather than checking the box, and click Save. So notice the feedback from WebLogic that we have one item to restart. Go ahead and click on that View Changes and Restarts link at the top here, and click on the Restart checklist. Yep, we do have to restart the admin server. So let's switch back to the admin console. Switch back to the terminal window and kill the admin server. Go ahead and restart it. So notice that while this is still starting up, that the default administration channel is listening, even though the admin server is still starting up. So what's happening here is that the admin server is accessible on the admin port, but the standard unsecure listen port is not available because the applications are still initializing. So I could have logged into the admin server while the server was still loading, still fully loading. So once the admin server is running, go back to another terminal window. I'm going to exit out of Derby here and go to your domain home. And in the WL server domain home, I want to show you the audit logs that are being created. And each server will have its own audit log. So under servers, let's go to the admin server, and each server has a logs directory. So do a listing in here. And notice that there's the server log, there's an HTTP access log, and there's logs for other subsystems like the JMS servers and store and forward agents. And there's also the domain logs. The domain log is very similar to the admin server log. There's a lot of information that is shared. The domain log is the name of the domain .log. But notice in here that there's a default audit recorder log. This is your audit log. And this file will grow and grow and grow until it's rotated by WebLogic according to the configuration and rotation parameter, which the default is 1,440 minutes. So this file, in that amount of time, if you've got a lot of traffic, will get very large. So go ahead and take a look at this audit log for a second. And it's blank. Okay, so we haven't done anything yet. That's why this file's blank. Go ahead and tail this log file. If you're an OS 10 or Linux, you can do this. In Windows, you'll need some special tools to do that. So tail the log file. Now go back to the admin console. Make sure you're logged out of it. And try logging in with a bogus username and password. So after you get the authentication denied message, switch back to your terminal window and take a look at the output. Severity failure, which is the type of event that we're listening for based on how we configure the auditing provider. And you'll see that, and then you'll see the authentication failed message here. User ASD denied, authentication failed. Not only will you see authentication failure messages in here, you'll see any type of security failure message in here that could include authorization failures as well. So I could authenticate successfully, but I may not have access to perform certain functions or to access certain resources. So those failures will show up in here.